We're going to get more details from CBS and standing by for a news conference from Capitol Police shortly. It's 3:28.
103.5 WTOP Radio. Traffic and weather on the 8s and when it breaks.
Across Capitol Hill, Independence Avenue reopened.
All right, thanks to WTOP. Now back to the floor. The House has reconvened for the afternoon session. Live coverage on C-SPAN.
Today we've had a reminder again of how much we owe our men and women in uniform, and I want to express the gratitude of the members of the House, the people of America, to our men and women in uniform who keep our streets safe every day, and say that our hearts and our prayers are with those injured officers today, and to express our immense gratitude to each and every one of them all over the country and to our men and women in uniform around the world who make it possible for us to be here today in the greatest deliberative democracy ever created in the history of humanity. We owe it all to our men and women in uniform. And I'd like to have, if I could, Madam Speaker, with your permission, ask for a moment of silent prayer for those officers who have been injured today.
All members rise. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We are here today to work arm in arm in support of our men and women in uniform, and I'm pleased at this time to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rowe.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the chairman for yielding, and Madam Speaker, as a former mayor, I associate my remarks with the chairman, and I rise in strong support of the legislation on the floor today. What we have before us today is an opportunity to keep the faith with America's veterans, of which I am one, and ensuring the funding for disability payments for the GI Bill, which I used, education, training, and VA home loans. No matter what your thoughts on the current impasse, we owe our veterans this much. This should not be, must not be, become a partisan issue. There are real and serious debates to be had about how we're able to deal with Obamacare and our nation's debt crisis, but that's not what we're discussing now. Northeast Tennessee, which I'm honored to represent in this body, has a long history of military service and hosts Mountain Home VA Medical Center, one of the largest and finest such facilities in the country. When I visit them, I don't see Republicans or Democrats. I see patriots who answered the call, did their duty, and then came home to make a life. Let's make sure they all get the support they need, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
At this time, I'm delighted to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, the ranking member of the Homeland Security Subcommittee.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I have the privilege of representing one of the most military-friendly and veteran-friendly areas of the country, North Carolina. So I'm glad our Republican colleagues are concerned with maintaining funding for our nation's veterans. But it's too bad they didn't think a little more about the VA before forcing this government shutdown on us Monday night. And now it's too bad they're not showing equal concern for the more than 500,000 veterans who now serve their country as federal employees, many of whom have been sent home on furlough and now have bills piling up, or the veteran small business owners whose SBA loans are on hold, or the veteran parents whose kids have been turned away from Head Start, or the veterans earning their graduate degrees whose research labs have been closed. Madam Speaker, of course we need to restore full funding for the VA so it can resume its full array of services to our nation's veterans, to whom we owe a special debt of gratitude and support. But veterans want the same thing we all Americans want, for us to reopen the entire government so they can get on with their lives as parents and workers and members of their communities. You don't have to take my word for it. In a letter sent this morning to the bipartisan congressional leadership, the heads of several major veterans service organizations write, and I quote, "Our organizations and the veterans we represent will no longer tolerate Congress leveraging veterans' health and well-being to achieve unrelated political ends." Or in the succinct words of the spokesman for the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VA needs to be fully funded, not piecemealed, and not used as leverage. So let's dispense with this political theater and this piecemeal approach that fails to end the shutdown. The Senate has approved a clean funding bill that will pass this House easily this very afternoon if the Speaker will simply let it be voted on. It's time to get on with this business that the American people elected us to do.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 3233, an act to extend the period during which Iraqis who were employed by the United States government in Iraq may be granted special immigrant status, and to temporarily increase the fee or surcharge for processing machine-readable non-immigrant visas.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, at this time I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise today to address the emerging pattern of poor decision-making coming from the Obama administration on national security. Under sequestration, this White House mandated that civilian defense workers be furloughed even when agencies had the money to pay these employees, many of whom are veterans. And today, under this partial government shutdown, the White House has again chosen to furlough the vast majority of these same workers against the express will and intent of Congress. Earlier this week, all of us here in Congress passed a bipartisan bill which the President signed to expressly protect the pay of active-duty military, civilian defense employees, and designated defense contractors. The Pentagon can put these workers back on the job today, but the White House is choosing to furlough our critical civilian defense workers. The Obama administration is also eroding our national security by choosing to furlough 70% of the civilian employees at our intelligence agencies. This is unnecessary. The law is now on the books to put civilians back to work to protect our national defense. Let's do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Georgia.
At this time, I also would like to extend our condolences, and we'd also like to express our appreciation to the Sergeant-at-Arms and to the Capitol Police for their hard work in making sure that the people that work in this Capitol and the members and visitors are safe. And we appreciate their vigilance during the recent incident. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Farr, who is the ranking member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, give us back our committee. Give us back our chairman. Mr. Culberson worked with all of us on both sides of the aisle for about 6 months to do a Veterans Appropriations bill. This is not it. This is a disastrous bill because this cuts $2.6 billion out of the bill that we passed. This doesn't help veterans. This is game playing. Our Appropriations Committee is supposed to have 12 bills on this floor. We have none. We don't have a simple one just to pass to keep government open. We've never done this before. Never. No preconditions ever in the history like this. We have a good committee. We have a good chairman. Give us back the process. Give us back an ability to keep this government open. Defeat this bill.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia reserve. Gentleman from Texas.
I'll reserve.
Gentleman from Texas reserve. Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chair. How many more speakers we have? At least 3. Just call them.
How many more speakers?
Three.
Three.
This time, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, a member of the Appropriations Committee.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, as we approach the end of the first week of the GOP shutdown, I want to highlight the impact it's having on just one sector of our government, the intelligence community. As Director Clapper and Director Alexander made clear in testimony in the Senate yesterday, 70% of key analysts have been forced to leave their posts. This is irresponsible, tragic, and most painfully, completely avoidable. House Republicans now say they will put up a bill funding veterans, but not the intelligence agencies, or tomorrow, the intelligence agencies, but not the FBI, or the FBI, but not the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS and NIH, but not the Department of Justice. This is ridiculous, senseless, and reckless. Let's be honest about what the House leadership is really saying. We will choose, hostage by hostage, which agency of the government we will release. We will do so only to buy time until the ransom we want we get, the repeal of an unrelated health care reform. As our intelligence analysts and other key personnel sit idle, our adversaries do not. Those who threaten the country have not been furloughed. Those devising new ways to attack our homeland, our allies, and innocent civilians around the world are not on hiatus. They are working hard, and so must we. End the reckless shutdown now. Put the intelligence agencies back to work. Put all Americans back to work. End the endless series of man-made, avoidable, and irresponsible crises that threaten our country and our economic recovery. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Reserves. Inquires to how much time is remaining.
Gentleman from Georgia has 5.5. The gentleman from Texas has 7.
Reserve.
Reserves?
Yes.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I want to point out that the House today, the only question before the House today is a yes or no vote whether or not you support funding our veterans. This is not complicated. The Veterans Administration has said they will run out of money unless we pass this legislation today to make certain that our veterans who have earned these important benefits receive them. And at this time, I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Sutherland.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to represent 72,000 veterans in Florida's 2nd Congressional District. The bill that we will be voting on today is a bill that says we support you not just for what you need today, but we also support you for what you did in your past. And what our veterans did in their past was join arms with fellow Americans and went to fight for a principle of no special treatment. They believe deeply in the Declaration of Independence that says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud today to join arm in arm with our veterans to say we agree with that principle. It is time that we reestablish the deeply held belief that there is one standard that should apply to all Americans, not two standards, not a ruling class and then the majority of the Americans that have to serve them. There is but one standard. I applaud our veterans. I thank them for their sacrifice, and I believe that this bill, honoring our promise to America's Veterans Act, is the only thing that is right and principled in this chamber today. I urge my colleagues to vote yes in just a few moments on this bill honoring our veterans, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Florida yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Georgia.
At this time, Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michaud, ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee.
The gentleman from Maine is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise today in opposition to this bill, which is nothing more than a political ploy. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle say a vote against this bill is a vote to block veterans' services. It's actually this government shutdown which they have caused that's threatened the VA's ability to provide the services for our veterans. If Republicans in this House are really serious about helping our veterans, they'd pass a clean CR and end this government shutdown that they have caused. If they really want to guarantee veteran services are adequate, they would bring forward this House H.R. 813 as amended to the floor. This bipartisan bill would fund all of VA through future advanced appropriation and take this political football off the table forever. Passing that bill will help make sure that veterans will no longer be used like they are being used today as a pawns of a political party scheme. This is outrageous, and I would encourage my Republican colleagues to bring up H.R. 813 as amended to the full floor so we can stop playing political football with the men and women who serve this great nation of ours. It's unbelievable that you do such a thing. And if you think that you're convincing the VSOs that if we don't fund this, then we're not supporting veterans, they know the difference. They see through the political football. They are tired of it, and I'd encourage you to encourage the Speaker to bring up, once again, H.R. 813 as amended, passed unanimously by the Veterans Affairs Committee for a full vote on this House. This is outrageous, and it's just nothing but a political gimmick today. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back, balance my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia reserves. Members are reminded to direct all comments and all remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I want to remind all members that the Veterans Administration has said that funds for these benefits will expire at the end of this month. And any time you have a disagreement, you try to find those areas where you can agree and that are especially important and set those aside. That's what we're doing today. And the House majority has brought this bill to the floor to ensure that our veterans and their survivors will receive their disability compensation benefits. A yes vote will ensure that low-income veterans and their families get their pensions. A yes vote will ensure three-quarters of a million students will receive their post-9/11 GI education benefits, that unemployed veterans will receive their benefits, and that 67,000 veterans with service-connected disabilities will get their vocational rehabilitation and employment subsistence benefits that they have earned by their service to the country. And again, I stress the VA has said these benefits will run out at the end of this month, so we've chosen what is our highest priority, looking after our men and women in uniform, an area that we are in complete agreement on, and brought it to the floor in good faith, and we'd hope our colleagues will join us in either voting yes or no in support of our veterans. And at this time, I'm pleased to yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute and a half.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you, my colleague from Texas, on allowing me to have a moment here. You know, we are here to honor our veterans, all Americans, by the work we do here. And it's been shameful the last few days of what our veterans who come all the way to Washington, D.C., our World War II veterans and some of the Korean veterans I met as well, too, to see themselves blockaded unnecessarily out of what is theirs over the politics of a shutdown. Now the politics of the shutdown come into this room here. You know, we don't always get to do the perfect bill around this place. To see my Democrat colleagues basically yelling at us over, we want the perfect bill, we want it all in one, when we'd be able to find the things we can agree on, including this bill, including other measures put up in the last couple of days. We could all agree on this portion of any CR bill together. We can put this out and stop the hijinks, stop the politics, stop the games, and get this agreement done, because we all agree on this piece of legislation, that it should be done, that it's the right thing. It'll get veterans served and get them out of this mess, out of this pool of muck that we are in on fighting over this CR, fighting over this shutdown. So let's agree today to get our veterans served and take the political football out, take the name-calling out, Republicans, Democrats, all that stuff, and get the job done. We're here to get the job done. On my farm, I don't get everything done in one day. Make progress a little bit at a time, one field at a time. This is one field at a time here. We can do this bill instead of holding each other hostage because the Democrats want the perfect all-in-one bill. We can do the pieces we agreed on together. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Georgia.
At this time, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Brown, a strong and consistent advocate for veterans and a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee for over 20 years.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's be clear. God has blessed us with the best veterans in the world. But you know, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. And the veterans understand that if they vote for this bill, it is a $6 billion cut to veteran services. So now what are you cutting? The National Cemetery Administration, the office in charge of construction of VA facilities, Office of Inspector General, grants to the states for veterans homes, grants to the state cemetery. All four veterans organizations said that there is a problem in the House of Representatives, lack of leadership. Bring a clean CR to the floor. Let's vote it up. You are not fooling anybody. This is the Republican right-wing part that is bringing this terrible instance to this country. No reason. Bring up a clean Ciara.
Has expired.
Clean Ciara.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Georgia reserve.
Mr. Speaker, I would rise to just simply point out very quickly there are no cuts in this bill. We're simply funding these essential veterans services through December 15th at a level equal to the amount that we have already passed out of the House the first week of June. There are no cuts. We want to make sure these essential services continue for our veterans and they don't see any interruption in services. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserved. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to just sort of point out the fact that while the bill may do what my good friend has suggested, it doesn't fund all of the accounts. There are a number of accounts, as has been pointed out time and time again, that are not funded. May I inquire, Mr. Speaker, as to how much time is remaining?
Yes. The gentleman from Georgia has 2¼ minutes, and the gentleman from Texas has 2½ minutes.
I thank you, and at this time I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
How much time would you like to yield?
1 minute.
1 minute. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the Republican Party is a party with such a rich legacy. It's a party of Abraham Lincoln, who saved this country. It's the party of Dwight David Eisenhower, who put the expressway and the interstate system together. It's the party of Everett Dirksen, without whom we wouldn't have the Civil Rights Act. It's the party of Ronald Reagan, who sat down with Tip O'Neill and put the great tax cut in that helped the economy. It's the party of George Bush, who gave us that Medicare Part D. I bring these things out because I believe if all of these gentlemen were here, each one of them, they would say to you, please, let's cut this out. Let your leader, Mr. Boehner, bring a clear, clean CR for just 6 weeks. That's all we're asking. This is what that leadership would be. This is what Mr. Boehner wanted to do. John Boehner's a decent man. That's what he wanted to do. I urge you to do what is right. Honor the rich legacy of your party. And if the veterans, you want to honor the veterans who gave their lives to fight for us, they say, don't use us for a pawn here. Open it up for all Americans.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia, reserved.
Yes, if I may.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
I just want to point out very quickly, we are funding the most essential parts of the Veterans Administration where we have been told they will run out of money within the next 30 days. And we want to ensure that our veterans don't have a thing to worry about. We don't want their families, their children, their survivors to worry for one moment whether or not their benefits are going to be there. We bring this bill to the floor today to ensure that they are taken care of, their peace of mind is secured, and also this is clearly one of those areas in support of our veterans where we can agree. And again, I stress common courtesy and common sense tell us when you have a disagreement, you find those areas where you can come together and agree and put that behind you. And that's all this is. Not complicated. Let's vote together today to make sure that our veterans programs are fully funded. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Georgia.
At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 30 seconds to my good friend, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn, the Assistant Democratic Leader.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. I'm pleased that my friend will yield me 30 seconds. I just want to take a little time to say that I've been hearing from the veterans in my congressional district. I represent counties that have 2 VA centers, veterans centers. We have 2 of the most, I believe, effective veterans service organizations in the country. And they tell me they do not wish to be pitted against their siblings and their spouses. They do not wish to be pitted against their children and their grandchildren. Let's not pick winners and losers. Let's fund the full
gentleman's time has
bill.
expired.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Georgia. Reserve.
I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.J. Res. 59, the Senate Clean Bill, includes all programs administered by the VA. Let me repeat, all programs. The Senate didn't cherry-pick which programs get funded. It continues operations of the entire federal government. On the other hand, the anemic H.J. Res. 72 that we're voting on here, the medical research account is not included. Construction, major and minor, not included. Office of the Secretary, Board of Veterans Appeals, not included. Inspector General, not included. IT account, not included. Grants to state veterans homes, state cemeteries, the National Cemetery Administration, not included. Enough of these games. Let's pass a CR. Let's do our work. Let's finish our work. Let's fund the government and put these workers back to work. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, could I inquire how much time is remaining?
The gentleman from Texas has 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, it's important to remember that as we have done in the House and the Senate has already done by unanimous consent, we have paid our active duty military. Their salaries are paid so they don't have to worry about it as they stand on the walls of Rome in defense of our freedom. Today we bring this legislation to the floor to be sure that past generations of our military men and women who have served this country and defended our freedom and made it possible for us to be here today, that their benefits are fully funded. We've been told straight up by the VA that the items that are before the House today will run out of money before the end of this month. This is not complicated. It truly is common sense and common courtesy to find those areas of agreement, set those aside, do those in priority order. We've made sure the current generation of military men and women are paid. We're now today making sure that our veterans of previous generations are fully compensated for survivor benefits, for low-income veterans, for student 9/11 GI benefits, for unemployed veterans. We're going to make sure that veterans with service-connected disabilities are taken care of. What we attempted to do is, my colleague from Georgia knows, we've always worked arm in arm in support of our veterans, is to find those areas where the help is needed the most, urgently, and to set that aside and get her done now, before these benefits run out. And the vote today is very simple. Yes or no? Will you vote to support America's veterans and honor them for their sacrifice and ensure that they don't miss a minute, that there's no bubble in the pipeline of the benefits that they have earned by their sacrifices for this great nation? This is a simple yes or no vote in support of our veterans. And I yield back the balance of my time and urge passage of the legislation.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 370, the previous question is ordered. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Third reading.
Joint resolution making continuing appropriations for veterans' benefits for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlewoman opposed to the joint resolution?
I am opposed to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
If the gentlewoman qualifies, the clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Duckworth of Illinois moves to recommit the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 72, to the Committee on Appropriations with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Strike all after the resolving clause and insert the following. That upon passage of this joint resolution by the House of Representatives...
Speaker?
What purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
I'd like to...
if we could, I'd like to have it read.
Oh, please.
Thank you.
Clerk will read.
The joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, as amended by the Senate on September 27, 2013, shall be considered to have been taken from the Speaker's table, and the House shall be considered to have 1. Receded from its amendment, and 2. Concurred in the Senate amendment.
The gentleman from Texas seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve a point of order on the gentlewoman's motion.
The gentleman's point of order is reserved. Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would appear that the chairman has resigned himself to keeping government shut down for 30 days so that the VA will run out of money in that 30 days' time. The way to ensure that the VA doesn't run out of money in 30 days is to pass a clean CR to reopen all of government. Mr. Speaker, I've spent every moment since waking up in my hospital bed at Walter Reed defending our military and serving our veterans. I know when they're being exploited. Mr. Speaker, the bill we are debating isn't a serious or respectful attempt to support our nation's heroes. It will not help veterans, and in fact, it does just the opposite. It cuts more than $6 billion in funds for the Department of Veterans Affairs from the same bill that my colleagues and I passed 421-4 just earlier this year. I can't support this bill because it pits one veteran against another. It would continue paying out pension benefits at the cost of cutting medical and prosthetics research for wounded veterans. It would give veterans in the VA their health care and needed mental health services, which I applaud, but it leaves 800,000 of their brothers and sisters, my brothers and sisters, caught in the backlog where they would have to wait even longer to get a decision on their benefits. It would allow our troops with post-traumatic stress to access the Veterans Crisis Line, but at the expense of not laying our heroes to rest in our national cemeteries on a timely basis. It would allow our veterans to be counseled for military sexual trauma, but not quickly review the appeals that they submit to get compensation they so rightfully deserve for that trauma. This is unacceptable. It is shameful we are even considering responding to our veterans' service to our nation with a funding cut at a time when the need for their services has never been greater. And we don't fund government by pitting one group against another. A piecemeal bill to fund some veterans could still allow TRICARE to run out of funds for prescription medication for our military and retirees. We're not a nation that would ask veterans to accept funding at the expense of their children who are in Head Start. A piecemeal approach bill tells our thousands of military and veterans families who rely on food stamps that we will pay their salaries when they go to war, but we won't feed their children. And the idea that funding the VA will protect their benefits from the effects of this shutdown is simply not true. Our veterans are also small business owners in Elgin, Illinois. They are students in Addison. They're homeowners in Hanover Park, and many of them continue to serve their country as government employees. Funding just part of the VA will not help the veterans who are waiting on loans from the Small Business Administration. So let's put our politics aside and stop using our veterans as pawns. This approach will not meet the full range of needed, desperately needed veteran services. It is no way to fund government. Our veterans didn't leave their comrades behind on the field of battle. And shame on us, shame on the majority for leaving them and the nation they defended without a government. Our nation is better than this. We are better than this. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this motion to recommit. And please, please allow us to bring up the clean, Senate-passed continuing resolution that has the additional $6 billion of funding for our heroes, for our veterans. Let's reopen the government so we can get back to the work of serving our nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Texas will speak on his point of order.
I make a point of order that the instructions contained in the motion violate Clause 7 of Rule 16, which requires that an amendment be germane to the bill under consideration. As the Chair recently ruled on October 2, 2013, the instructions contain a special order of business within the jurisdiction of the Committee on Rules, and therefore the amendment is not germane to the underlying bill. Mr. Speaker, I insist on my point of order.
The gentleman insists. Does the gentleman from Illinois wish to be heard on the point of order?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
Speaker, if you rule this motion out of order, does that mean we will not have a chance to keep the entire federal government open today? Can the Chair please explain why we can't open the entire federal government today?
The Chair is prepared to issue a ruling. The gentleman from Texas makes a point of order that instructions proposed in the motion to recommit offered by the gentlewoman from Illinois are not germane. The joint resolution extends funding relating to certain veterans' benefits within a portion of the fiscal year 2014. The instructions in the motion propose an order of business of the House relating to funding for all other agencies and departments subject to the annual appropriations process for the remainder of the fiscal year. As the Chair ruled earlier today, as well as on October 2, 2013, a motion to recommit proposing an order of business of the House is not germane to a measure providing for the appropriation of funds because such motion addresses a matter within the jurisdiction of a committee not represented in the underlying measure. Here, the instructions propose a non-germane amendment. The point of order is sustained. Gentlelady from Illinois.
Chair.
The question is, shall the decision of the Chair stand as the judgment of the House? The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I move to lay the appeal on the table.
The question is on the motion to table. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it.
I ask for the ayes and nays.
The ayes and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the ayes and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, this is a 15-minute vote on the motion to table. Will be followed by a 5-minute vote on the joint resolution, the passage of the joint resolution, if arising without further proceedings in recommittal. This is a 15-minute vote.
After a chaotic afternoon on Capitol Hill, the House returned about 3:30 Eastern to finish debate on a bill that would partially fund the Department of Veterans Affairs, one of the so-called mini-CRs that the House has been working on over the last couple of days. First, just sort of a recap here on the lockdown on Capitol Hill. A shooting incident shortly after 2 o'clock caused that lockdown. And if you were watching the House, obviously the House gavelled out at that moment of the lockdown. Well, since then, we've found that there has been a shooting incident on Capitol Hill, and the White House is confirming that the incident began actually near the White House at 15th and Pennsylvania, the edge of the White House grounds near the Treasury Department, and ensued a chase to Capitol Hill. There was a shooting, a suspect involved, and also a child. And we are what we're going to do is give you a chance to see the latest update from Capitol Hill from Capitol Police. We're carrying that on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. So the latest from Capitol Hill. There is a suspect apparently in custody, and a child was involved apparently in the car that was chased from the White House or nearby the White House to Capitol Hill. Again, more details at about 4:15 Eastern. That'll be on C-SPAN 2. It'll also be streamed online at cspan.org. Here on C-SPAN, we're going to open up our phone lines to get your thoughts on the continuing debate on funding the federal government as the stalemate continues. On the third day of the government shutdown, the phone lines are for Republicans 202-585-3885, Democrats 202-585-3886, and Independents 202-585-3887. Again, the underlying bill they'll vote on next is this partial funding of the Department of Veterans Affairs, this 15-minute vote. Democrats have been seeking to bring up a motion that the House consider what they call the clean CR, and that was ruled out of order by the chair. This is a procedural vote related to that. Your call is coming up in just a moment, though. First, the comments, though, of the Majority Leader, Eric Cantor.
About 17 or 18 House Republicans have said they support a clean CR moving forward. Why not support that bill so the NIH can get funded and then fight the Obamacare fight within the context of the debt limit coming up on October 17th?
Well, first of all, I think the Speaker and I have both said that the Republican position is we believe we should fund this government, but we also believe that there should not be any special treatment for anyone. And that is why we believe the right solution to that is to provide for a delay of the individual mandate under the health care law. Because what that says is big business, special interests, shouldn't get special treatment exemptions under that law if working people don't get it. And in the same vein, and perhaps with even more intensity, no way in the world should members of Congress get special treatment under that law either. So all we've got to do is come together and we can iron out the differences. But as you can see now, I guarantee you there is a majority of senators in the Senate on both sides of the aisle that support this funding bill to provide the relief immediately to these kids and their parents who are facing these dire circumstances.
The government performs a lot of life and death roles, food inspections, food for low-income women and children. How are you picking and choosing what should get the funding first?
Well, we are going to go forward
with trying to address situations that are in critical stages. And as Renee and others had said, these parents are at a critical point. These are clinical trials that somehow have been determined not essential by the NIH. This is life-saving stuff here. We've got other areas of the law, and we'll bring forward today, that will try and address the critical things that are going on in this country. All this, though, can be resolved if we can sit down and talk. That's how the American people expect them and their families to work out differences. It's no different here. We should sit down and have a discussion. But because there is an insistence on no negotiations, no talking, my way or the highway, we are here.
Mr. Leader, the NIH budget was cut about $1.2 billion last year because of sequestration. The labor HHS bill that was being drafted by the Appropriations Committee cut it another roughly 20%, about $6 billion. Are you saying now that perhaps there's been a change of thinking about the role of government and how much money should be going to these agencies?
Jonathan, you know I have been insistent on making as a priority funding for the NIH, and specifically funding for pediatric medical research for exactly the reasons that Todd Rokita said. When you have somebody young and have a whole life that potentially could be ahead of that child, I don't think there are many things as a priority for us as human beings or this federal government to put an emphasis on and fund. And I would say again, you look to see and ask the Democrats in this House whether they support a clean CR with sequester or not. So this assumption that everyone is operating on, that somehow there is unanimity on the Democratic side that they would support a CR at sequester level, is an assumption that I question. So again, we're trying to find the things that we can agree on in common where there is a majority vote in both houses. Certainly, pediatric medical research for clinical trials is something, given the circumstances, that I think we ought to get done, Harry Reid ought to take up today. Thank you very much.
Comments from Majority Leader Eric Cantor earlier today. Back looking live at the House, the first of two votes. The second vote will be on the Department of Veterans Affairs, the partial funding bill, the so-called mini-CR. That'll be a 5-minute vote. And during this 15-minute vote, we've opened up our phone lines to hear from you. First up is Merritt Island, Florida. And Patrick, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Patrick from Merritt Island. I appreciate you giving me this chance. If you'll give me a couple of seconds to give my little bit of a statement, and then I have a question for you.
Okay.
I mean, I just watched that videotape that you just played of Eric Cantor. I don't know how these people can do this. I'm an independent. I'm very, very astute about what's going on in our government, and that is just a bald-faced lie. If they were so interested in pediatrics for just the 200 or 40 kids that they're trying to use as a pawn here, then they would let the Obamacare go through, and that would cover those pediatrics for those kids. Their parents could have insurance for pre-existing conditions. So on one hand, they want to repeal Obamacare and kill any chance for any little kid to be able to get insurance so they can get procedures, and that's just ridiculous. They are so unwilling to tell the truth. Now, my question for you, sir, I've been watching you for several days, and you have not said one time to the public that the reason that we're not letting this bill go through with any of these little additions they keep minusing down to try to make some political point is that once they accept any of this, once they accept it, then we go back to the same old procedures where the Senate cannot stop or take something with 51 votes. Why don't you tell the American people that if we were to accept any one of these bills with one of these riders on it, now it becomes a procedure that goes back to the stupidity in the Senate of a supermajority vote, and an idiot like Cruz could stand there and say, I don't want to take anything. And he could stop everything in the Senate immediately, just like they've done 430-some-odd times in the last 2.5 years.
All right, Patrick, thanks for checking in with us and your comments. Conestoga, Pennsylvania, Trudy's on the Democrats' line.
Well, I just wanted to say
the Republicans, they don't like Obama. That's why they're holding the country hostage. And I go to bingo at the VFW, and those people, they're Republicans, and they think the next time they're going to vote Democrats. I want to thank you for taking my call. Bye.
New Iberia, Louisiana. This is Bosun on our GOP line. Go ahead.
How you doing? Yes.
Doing fine, thanks.
I'd just like to say, you know, I was a Democrat and I went over to being a Republican. Now, for the first time, I'm proud of the GOP party for standing up, because the power of the purse is in Congress. Now, President Obama needs to break the walls that he built among the American people. He could tear that down now. And that's it. Bye.
To Abilene, Kansas. Jerry's on the Independence line. Jerry, you there? There's Jerry. Hello, Jerry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I am a retired veteran, and if they don't get something straightened out on this Veterans Affairs, that is the only income I have got. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's all taken from the poor and give it to the rich. And I've seen this. I'm 63 years old. I've seen this over and over and time again. And it just does not work. The Democrats and the Republicans need to get together and get their differences figured out and find out what in the world is going on with this country.
The House will be voting on that temporary spending bill, on that partial spending bill, funding the Department of Veterans Affairs. That's the next vote coming up. The House came back in at about 3:30 Eastern after the lockdown on Capitol Hill and the shooting incident. A news conference coming up at right about now, as a matter of fact, and we'll cover that live for you on C-SPAN 2, and it's also streaming live over on cspan.org. Chattanooga, Tennessee. Next up is David on the Republican line.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I want America to know my grandson is fighting in Afghanistan. And when they go out in the morning, when they come back in from fighting the enemy, they are guaranteed a hot meal to eat. But because of the government shutdown and Ted Cruz, when they come back in from fighting the enemy, they're not getting a hot meal. They are having to eat those prepackaged meals, which my grandson says taste like horse meat. So no one's talking about our veterans. I mean, first they were going to give my daughter-in-law an IOU instead of my grandson's paycheck, and now they won't even give them a hot meal because of Ted Cruz and this shutdown.
Now, he's in Afghanistan. He's not getting the half meal because the people employed to serve the meal at that facility in Afghanistan, they have been furloughed?
Pardon?
Have the people employed by the Defense Department to serve those meals been furloughed by the shutdown?
Yes, they have. They're not. No one in Afghanistan, the soldiers, are getting a hot meal. They're having to eat those prepackaged meals that come from Dick Cheney's company, Halliburton, and the meals taste like horse meat.
David, thanks for calling. The next vote is on the Veterans Bill, partial funding for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Let's hear from Spring Hill, Kansas, and Debbie on the Democrats line.
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I've just been watching the representatives go at each other, and I'm a veteran. I've served my time. I've served my country. And like the Democrats are saying, the majority of us veterans, we do not want to be used as simple pawns and furthering an ideology that I think is terrible. You know, it's like, I don't understand why they cannot pass a clean CR, get the government running, get the veterans the assistance and the funds they need, and after that, then debate all these other issues.
A couple of comments on Twitter. Miley says that, come on, House Democrats, let's get the veterans funded, show how important they are. Also, a quick note from HuffPost Politics. They tweet that the president was briefed on reports of gunfire at on Capitol Hill this afternoon. President Obama this morning was in Rockville talking about the government shutdown and looking ahead to the debate that's coming over the debt ceiling. Here's some of what he had to say.
And I want you to understand the consequences of this. As reckless as a government shutdown is, as many people as are being hurt by a government shutdown, an economic shutdown that results from default would be dramatically worse. In a government shutdown, Social Security checks still go out on time. In an economic shutdown, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, they don't go out on time. In a government shutdown, disability benefits still arrive on time. In an economic shutdown, they don't. In a government shutdown, millions of Americans, not just federal workers, everybody faces real economic hardship. In an economic shutdown, falling pensions and home values and rising interest rates on things like mortgages and student loans, all those things risk putting us back into a bad recession, which will affect this company and those workers and all of you. And that's not my analysis. That's every economist out there is saying the same thing. We've never done it before. And, you know, the United States is the center of the world economy, so if we screw up, everybody gets screwed up. The whole world will have problems, which is why generally nobody's ever thought to actually threaten not to pay our bills. It would be the height of irresponsibility. And that's why I've said this before. I'm going to repeat it. There will be no negotiations over this.
President Obama in Rockville, Maryland, just outside the nation's capital earlier today. All of his comments later in our program schedule and, of course, in our video library at cspan.org. Here on C-SPAN, we're taking your thoughts on this third day of the government shutdown, with the stalemate continuing on Capitol Hill and the vote ahead in the House on funding the Department of Veterans Affairs. That'll be a 5-minute vote coming up next. If the NBC reports that the longest shutdown of the government was in 1995-96. That was 21 days. We're at 3 days here. 78, it was 17-day shutdown. 77, 12 days. In the 1976, there was a 10-day shutdown of the federal government. Portland's next. Glenn's on the independent line. Hello, Glenn. Go ahead.
Hey, I just want to say the Democrats need to just hang in there. It's criminal that we do not have a single-payer system for health care in this country. You look at some of the other countries, industrialized countries, we rank 24th and 34th in infant mortality. That's criminal. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, Alex in New York City is on the Republican line.
Hi, a couple points. First of all, I like how the Democrats and left-leaning independents are all complaining. I didn't hear them complaining when Tip O'Neill, a Democrat, shut down the government when the Democrats also controlled the Senate and the presidency 20-some-odd years ago. No one complained then. Obama's outright lying. The 14th Amendment in that piece you just aired said, well, if the government gets shut down due to either the debt limit not being exceeded, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution already addresses this. It goes into a prioritization of payments. It's an absolute lie, what he's saying, that if we stop paying our debts, we will pay our debts. What we will have to do is curtail spending. Look around you. I know some of you do work for various federal agencies. Roughly 1 out of 300 people roughly works for a federal agency. Ask yourselves how much of your life is really affected. Okay? Basically, federal workers are our employees. We pay them. Okay? If the government doesn't do what we expect, we stop paying them. This health care bill, which is the crux of this debate, came around when the Democrats, without a single Republican, jammed it through on Christmas Eve back in 2009 without letting us add to it at all, okay? It's actually illegal because if you watch what happened with the Supreme Court, they changed the text from a penalty to a tax, allowed it under the precipice of it being a tax. Guess what? All taxes have to initiate in the House. This did not initiate in the House, therefore it's an illegal bill. The House is calling him out. The President further violated the law by, in his own health care bill, making it that corporations didn't have to abide by the law for a year. Now he's enforcing individuals to do it. So he's actually splitting up the corporate donors he has been so happy with individuals who didn't want it.
And that's some video from earlier today of President Obama. A couple of tweets this afternoon. C-SPAN chat is our hashtag. This one is from Ken, who says, really, everyone needs to read these bills and the CR. They are hoodwinking the public, and the final result is no CR without the budget. Another one from Furloughed Worker. Call for a vote on the clean CR, stop the irresponsible and ridiculous games. Democrats have been calling for that vote in a number of ways, including unanimous consent requests, which have been ruled out of order by the chair, and here is trying to make it as a motion to recommit, also ruled against by the chair, and this vote is going to table that appeal, and next will be the final passage vote on the Department of Veterans Affairs funding bill. To Carrollton, Virginia, we go to Greg on the independent line.
Yes, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Greg, go ahead.
Yes, if the Democrats or Republicans were serious about cutting spending, they would be using the shutdown to analyze the agencies that have been shut down and figure out where they can make wise cuts that aren't going to impact the economy or a majority of Americans. Also, additionally, to the gentleman from Chattanooga, Tennessee, was talking about the prepackaged meals. Those are MREs. They're called meals ready to eat.
Yeah.
And the agencies that cook are contractors, and usually it's KBR or Kellogg Brown & Root, which is a subsidiary of Halliburton.
Right.
And those MREs are they taste very good. Some of them not so much, but most of them are pretty good, and they're about 4,000 calories. So they're more than enough to sustain the troops. And you actually can have a hot meal by pouring hot water in it. And they are actually hot meals, but I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. He's referring to an earlier caller who had mentioned that his grandson's in Afghanistan and was complaining that the hot meal that the troops were getting is not there because of the furloughed workers at the facility there in Afghanistan. Well, yesterday all four leaders of Congress met with President Obama at the White House. This morning we heard from Harry Reid, the majority leader in the Senate.
We have a very simple message today for Speaker Boehner. Let the House stop those irresponsible, reckless games and just reopen the government. He single-handedly is keeping the government shut. Some recent stories have even suggested that the Speaker is keeping the government shut down because I hurt his feelings. If that's true, I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. But we shouldn't take it out on hundreds of thousands of Americans who are out of work, and they're really suffering. I can only imagine what leaders around the world must think. I met yesterday with very briefly, I had to go to the White House, didn't spend a lot of time, with the Greek Prime Minister. I had talked to him on the phone before I was looking forward to the visit. I didn't say anything, but I was kind of embarrassed. I mean, you know, Greek government's having a lot of problems been going on, and our problems? We shouldn't be a dysfunctional government. There's no reason to be other than one man, and that's Speaker Boehner. He can't perform the most basic functions of government because he doesn't have the courage to stand up to that small band of anarchists. I know that that's not the path that he preferred. I know that because we met the first week we came back in September, and he told me that what he wanted is a clean CR and the 988 number. Now, we've said this before. We didn't like the 988 number. We didn't like it. But we negotiated. That was our compromise. The exact bill that he now refuses to let the House vote on, that was our negotiation. I didn't twist his arm. He twisted mine a little bit to get that number. It's not a number that Patty Murray liked. That wasn't her budget number, but that was a compromise. Now, he refused to let his own party vote because he's afraid to stand up to something he originally agreed to. Who's stopping him from having this vote? A very small band of people. Now, what do they want? We're not going to be disrespected. And I said on the floor this morning, if I disrespected Marlin Stutzman, I'm sorry. We're not going to be disrespected. We have to get something out of this. Now listen to this. This is where the speaker is. And I don't know what that even is. That's what we're dealing with. All they have to do is let the House work its will. Clean CR would pass the House with a bipartisan majority, no question about that. All he has to do is let them vote.
Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid from this morning. The Senate is done for the day. They gavelled out shortly after the lockdown situation on Capitol Hill wrapped up just after 3 o'clock Eastern. Want to let you know that the Capitol Police will be holding a briefing in the latest news on that shooting situation and the lockdown, the chase from the White House, etc. That's supposed to come up shortly. We will have it live for you over on C-SPAN 2. Here on C-SPAN, we're watching the tail end of this procedural vote ahead of the vote on the spending bill, the funding bill for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Let's see if we can get a couple of more calls here to Supply, North Carolina. It's William, Supply, North Carolina. Good afternoon.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I would like to say that I don't blame the Democrats or the Republicans. I blame both. I coach Pee Wee football, and my kids get along better than these guys do. I'm 58 years old, and I've never seen a time in this great country when our country is run by so many people that everything is okay and the most highly educated idiots in the world. If the American people are sick of this, remember it when you walk into the voting booth. Thank you.
Okay, William, thank you. Just adding on to his comments, here's one of our tweeters using C-SPAN chat, hoping for independence. I'm hoping to see some independence next term in the House, says Ryan. GOP Fashionista says, talking about a previous tweet, says that furloughed worker, you're on a paid vacation, you're going to get back pay. Try being unemployed for 2 years like many are. And Texas Girl says, why don't the Democrats and Republicans, what don't they get? America's credit card is maxed. We have to stop the spending, stop printing the money. Here's a Broadheadsville, Pennsylvania. Rich is on the independent line.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. This whole thing, you know, when you really look at it, I've never seen a bunch of politicians, especially on the right side. The whole thing with the Obama, they don't want this and they don't want this from Obama. I've never seen a more blatant display of racism by our political leaders because they don't want a black man in it. It comes right down to that. And you look at it, main reason why this country is running out of money. All you have to do is go on Coast to Coast AM, look at the archives.